Okay, BookTube, this is part 2 of my Greek and Roman shelf. I spent about 40 minutes talking about the books just sitting on front of the shelf. And that was too long, and I didn't feel like taking another 40 minutes in the same video to go through the actual shelf proper. So I figured I would do a part 2 and let this main shelf breathe. But then again, I'm not even getting onto the main shelf right away because I have to go through the books that are stacked on top of the main shelf, which is not a whole lot this time. It's only a few books, but still, it's kind of crazy that I have so many of these, so many books just wedged in here. But we start off with Sophocles. This is the 3 Theban plays of Sophocles. So Antigone, Oedipus the King, and Oedipus at Colonus. And this is the Robert Fagles translation. And it's also the volume I read these in, which I thought was really good. This is a stellar translation of these plays. I mean, I guess I can't really compare it to anything else, but I do have another volume of these Theban plays in a different translation, but I didn't read those, and I don't think I really compared them. Well, I did a little bit, but not a whole lot. And this volume has a great critical apparatus and a good introduction, so you can't really go wrong with this volume here. I do recommend this translation here. Then we move to Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound, and Other Plays. This is the Philip Vallacott translation, and this includes Prometheus Bound, The Suppliants, Seven Against Thebes, and the Persians. And these plays are probably some of our earliest tragedies, and this translation was uninspiring to me. The translation was not, I mean, it is done poetically, but it wasn't really, no effort was put in to actually make it poetical, which I guess makes sense when you're trying to translate from ancient Greek to English, but we've seen translators who do that and succeed, so it's kind of disappointing when you read an older translation like this, a translation from the 60s, and they kind of just sit on the page. And it doesn't help that the plays in here are all parts of trilogies, except for maybe the Persians, and you strongly get that sense that you're missing stuff. So I actually put it here in the table of contents. So Prometheus Bound is the first play of a ancient trilogy. The Suppliants is also first play in a trilogy. The other two, we only have the other surviving. We only have manuscripts or whatever, or fragments, I guess is the proper term, of the rest of the trilogy of both Prometheus Bound and the Suppliants. And then Seven Against Thebes is the concluding play in a separate trilogy as well. And then the Persians, I believe, is from what we understand, is a standalone, because it's very much of a very different type of work. It's more historical. So, a very interesting volume of plays, but not, nothing that's going to blow your socks off or anything like that. For me, it was more of a historical curiosity, and I didn't really find all that much interesting in these plays, but that's just me. Maybe I just need to try a different translation. And then we go to Homer himself. So, Homer makes an appearance here. This is the E.V. Ryu translation. And I believe this is the Penguin Classic volume that made Penguin Classics into a household name. This is E.V. Ryu's translation of the Odyssey that was published not necessarily in this exact design, but in this format. So mass market paperback, cheap. I don't know if this has a price on it, but cheap that people could buy it anywhere, and was available, all over the place, not just as some kind of scholarly endeavor that you need, a degree in classics in order to enjoy. You could just be a person at the bookstore, see this, sitting there on the shelf or something, and pick it up and spend just a little amount of change, and you can have Homer in translation in your pocket. And it's in prose, a prose translation, and the idea, the concept took off. And E.V. Ryu took an editorial role in Penguin Classics, and commissioned translations of all kinds of works. I don't know if I have any of the original Penguin Classic designs near me. I don't think I do. Yeah, those are all on top. So I have a whole bunch of mass market paperbacks sitting on top here, and that includes a lot of the original Penguin Classic designs, and which were not the black. The black only came later. So this is the Eevee Ryu Odyssey, which I have not read. I have read the Odyssey, just not in that translation. And I'll go through this first. Then we go back to Rome. We have a volume of Livy. This is his volume just called Rome and Italy. I think this is one of the beginning volumes. Does it say which books of Livy this produces? I don't think so. It's a translated and annotated by Betty Radis, but I don't think this tells me. Books 5 to 10, or books 6 to 10, sorry. 6 to 10. I think we have books 1 to 10 of Livy that survive, and then books like 20 to 40, I think, that survive, if I'm not mistaken. Or 21 to 40. Yeah, that's what it looks like here. I see my Oxfords here. So I have 5 to 10. I don't have. So all I'm missing of Livy that we have in, translated volumes like this, I'm missing the very beginning. So where Livy goes into the mythology of Rome, and kind of starts from the beginning of Rome and tries to go to his contemporary period. There's a huge section in there that we don't actually have, but we still have a lot of Livy. And then we go to Caesar. This is the Civil Wars, and this is my only Harvard Loeb Classical Library edition with no dust jacket. As you can see, just a small little squat volume. There, this is Caesar's Civil Wars. This is Roman literature, and this is translated by A.G. Prescott, and it's dual language. So we have the Latin on this side and then the English on that side. And I think this was a older translation, if I'm not mistaken. 1914. So, yes, definitely an older translation of this work. I do actually have the landmark Julius Caesar, which has all of Julius Caesar in there in modern translations with lots of critical apparatus and notes and whatnot. That'll be later on in our bookshelf tour. But then we go back to Cicero. This is How to Grow Old, which is a complete work by Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero, and it's translated with an introduction by Philip Freeman. And this is like a modern Princeton volume. So look, you can see it's similar in that they're small squat hardcovers. The only difference is that this one is from the 1914, and this one was from maybe 7 years ago. No, 10 years ago, 2016. So 10 years ago. And I have not read any Cicero, but this will probably be the first work of his I read, unless I want to go to his political speeches instead. And then we go to our first work of non-Greek and Roman ancient literature. This is The Laws of Manu, in a Penguin Classic volume, translated by Wendy Doniger with Brian K. Smith. And I don't know a whole lot about this other than it's Sanskrit, and it was translated first into English in 1794, but this is a modern translation, very much like Indian type literature, and the only thing that's really stands out about the description here is that Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, he thought this had more humane wisdom in it as an ancient work of literature than, say, the Bible, the New Testament. And that's kind of what they're promoting on the back here, but I don't know a whole lot about this, other than that I saw it used at a thrift store, and I thought it looked pretty cool, so I'll give this a try someday. And then we actually get to the shelf proper, and that's after, 10 minutes of throat clearing. Anyways, let's try, I'll go from left to right and see how that That might be tenuous. I don't want this shelf to collapse. Okay, so we're going to go from right to left. We start with Horace. This is his Satires and Epistles, and it is translated by who? Does it tell me? Smith Palmer Bovey. Smith Palmer Bovey. Never heard of that kind of name before, but and that's kind of a creepy cover if you look at that creature there. I don't know much about Horace other than I heard that it's hard to translate his work into English, so not to lay that at the feet of Horace if I don't find a whole lot of interest or intrigue in that volume. And then we have the Georgics of Virgil, and it's translated by David Ferry. And this one is bilingual, it says, so we get the original here in the Latin, and then the translation on this side. So yeah, that's Virgil, some Virgil there. Then we go back to The Golden Ass by Apuleius. This is translated by P.G. Walsh, and this is the Oxford version. So this is the my second translation of this. I might as well just show off the other translation. Later on in the shelf, we get my third translation of Apuleius' The Golden Ass, and this is by E.J. Kenny. A Penguin did a brand new, different translation of this work. We originally saw the Robert Graves, the revised Robert Graves translation by Michael Grant in a mass market, I believe. But yeah, this is a full-size trade paperback in a different translation. And then we have my second translation of Suetonius, The Lives of the Caesars, done by Catherine Edwards, and it's just a much more modern translation of Suetonius, who we saw in the first volume of this shelf in the previous video. And then we go to Lucan, Civil War, by translation done by Susan H. Brond. Susan H. Brond, and this is an epic poem that I don't hear talked about very much, mostly because it's probably not, one of the best surviving ancient poems that we have. It's very political. It deals, I believe, with the civil war between Caesar and Pompey. And I found this used, and I thought I would pick it up, even though I don't think it's considered, top of the line Roman literature. And then we have two volumes done by Livy here. This is what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. So the Livy that I have, if I can find them here, here we go. This includes part of the beginning of Livy that we have. Books, I think we have books 1 to 10, and this includes books 6 to 10. So not all of it, but some of it. And then between 10 and 20, I think there's a gap there that we don't have, only in fragments, and then continues in book 20, books 21 to 30, and then this is 31 to 40. And I don't know if it goes beyond that. I don't know if this continues past books 40 and goes into more modern history. I just don't know that, other than this is all that is translated in modern works of Livy, so I'm just missing the very beginning. But anyways, this translation here is J.C. Yardley, and so is this one. J.C. Yardley does both of these volumes of Livy. Then we get to another translation of Ovid. This is Ovid's Metamorphoses, but it's done by A.D. Melville. We originally saw Ovid on the previous video, the first part of this Ancient Classics shelf, the Penguin Classic prose translation of Ovid. This is a verse translation done by A.D. Melville in an Oxford trade paperback. And then we get to the Poems of Propertius, translation done by Guy Lee. The Poems of Propertius. I have not heard much of Propertius before, and I've not read anything by this author, and so I don't know what to expect. But it's a translation that I found used, and as a common theme among me, I will pick it up and I'll give it a read, because it was cheap. So, and then we get to my other volume of Plotus. So in volume 1, or my very first part 1 of this shelf, in the previous video I showed off a Penguin volume of Plotus and his comedies, and this is the other volume I have of his. I don't think there's a whole lot of overlap actually between them. So this has The Braggart Soldier, The Brothers Menacus, The Haunted House, and The Pot of Gold. Of course these are translated titles, so I don't know what they are in the original Latin, or if they're all that different, but it's nice to have 2 volumes of Plautus. And then I have the Annals of Tacitus. I believe we did see Tacitus before. And I'm pretty sure it was the Annals of Tacitus, but in a Penguin Classic version. This is the Oxford version done by Anthony A. Barrett. Oh no, sorry, that he does the introduction, sorry. The translation is done by J.C. Yardley, who also does our translation of Livy here. So I have a volume of Tacitus here. And then we get to 2 works I've actually read, and I can talk about a little bit. We have first Thucydides. This is the Oxford version translation of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. This is done by Martin Hammond, and notes by an introduction by P.J. Rhodes. And I've read this volume before, and I thought it was really good, a good translation, and the notes are exhaustive. Just crazy how exhaustive these notes are. The notes, let's see here if I can show you, from the very beginning to when the notes start. And yeah, right here, the notes start here, and this is all notes in smaller print. And the great thing about this work is that he starts off every chapter with a summary and a preface. So book 1 here of Thucydides, before you even get to the notes for book 1, which start right across the page here, you have all this and all this as introductory material to what happens in book 1. And then you actually get to the works of Thucydides in his introduction here, and then it goes by line numbers all around, so you get all the line numbers. And the mistake I made when going through this volume and going through the next volume that I'm going to talk about, well, it's no surprise. Like, when you talk about Greek history, you're going to talk about Herodotus next, or either one, because Herodotus came first. But both of them are exhaustive in their notes. But the problem is that when I was reading this for the first time, I was flipping back and forth between the notes because I wanted to see the historical accuracy and historical scholarship combined with Thucydides himself in the translation, and that stunted my reading. It meant I took a long time to read this. I think it took me like a month or maybe even a bit longer to read this, and it wasn't very exciting because if I would read, say, 10-20 pages of Thucydides, I would have to read an accompanying 10 pages of notes, which was not always that fun. So I think that was a mistake. What I should have done is just read this all the way through, and whenever I had a question or something that I wanted some more explaining or whatever, if I thought maybe Thucydides wasn't being totally accurate or he was biased or if he was leaving something out, then I can look into the notes. But what I should have done is waited to read those notes until a read-through a second time instead of the first time. And I have the same problem with Herodotus. This is the Robin Waterfield translation with notes and an introduction by Carolyn de Wald. And again, it's absolutely masterful, the amount of critical apparatus in this Oxford edition. It follows the same structure, so just tons of notes here. But again, you start off with book one, though she includes a timeline. So this is, or not so much a timeline, but a table of contents, really, of what goes on in book one, and then her introduction, which goes into all the way up to here, and then once you get this indent here, then you actually get commentary on the lines of Herodotus himself. And again, I had that same problem where I was reading, 30 pages of Herodotus, and then I felt like I had to go back and read, the 12 pages of notes in the back that were accompanying that section that I had just read. And that really slowed me down, and it really lost my enthusiasm for reading this. Even though I read both of them all the way through, and I like both of them, though obviously Herodotus is the better writer, the more entertaining, the more companionable writer. Though if you're going for pure history, of course, then Thucydides wins. But still, it was tough to read these books, and I want to give them another try and just read them for what they are. Though I do recommend, even though these are great works of scholarship, if you do want to read these as an introduction, I do recommend the Landmark series, which I do have. I have both of the Landmark series. I have the Landmark Herodotus and the Landmark Thucydides, and both of them include just tons of maps, and they have footnotes at the bottom, so you don't need to actually flip to the back and read stuff there, though they do have short essays in the back of their volumes that can help you out if you are, say, confused about, the ship war in Thucydides and how that works. Then you can read a 2-page essay in the back on what their ships look like and how they were built and how they used them in war. These are great. I wanted to read these because they're more modern translations. Well, I think the Landmark Herodotus is modern too, but still, that's what I wanted to read, and so that's what I did, and I don't regret it, because I found that a lot more interesting. But I did go through the Landmark as, I had the Landmark on one side, and then I had this volume on the other side, and then if there was a location I didn't know, then I would just go through and look at the maps, and I thought that was very helpful. But enough of that, I'll continue on the shelf. We go to Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy, this is a translation by P.G. Walsh, again, one of the most famous works of philosophy, ancient philosophy, I should say, and it's just a slim little work, and I've not read this volume, or read Boethius at all. What kind of makes, I don't know if upsets me is the right word, but what I don't like is that Boethius, this is the only work of his that seems to get any kind of translation in modern times. Boethius wrote a lot on, say, theology and whatever, and he wrote a lot more, and we don't have any translations of, or at least I don't know of any translations of Boethius that are easily accessible. Like Penguin and Oxford don't translate anything else by Boethius, and we have lots of Boethius in his other works, but this one is just, and he was a thorough Christian person, but this volume, if you read this volume, you wouldn't know, because it's not a very Christian work, or at least it doesn't focus on that. It's more theoretical, at least from my understanding, having not actually read Boethius myself. And then we get to, of course, the famous St. Augustine. This is his Confessions, translated by Henry Chadwick, and this seems to be the volume that most people have of this work, and I heard great things about this translation, so, and I have not read it myself. And then we move on to more St. Augustine. This is On Christian Teaching. It's nice to have another work of St. Augustine available that is not his usual works. There's the City of God, which we'll be seeing on the shelf, and the Confessions, which has a million translations. But Penguin or Oxford decided to translate this work here too, On Christian Teaching. And you could do a whole tract of his on, say, free will or whatever. But he wrote a ton of stuff, and we don't get most of it in, easily accessible translations like this. I'm sure there are translations of Augustine in scholarly versions that are like $70 each, but that doesn't really help me much because I'm not going to spend that money on a 130-page work on free will from someone who I can't even read the original from. So like, what is that going to help me? But if I can pay like $15 for this, then of course I will. And then we get to a volume that I have read, and it's not Greek or Roman literature. It's Myths from Mesopotamia, so ancient Babylonian creation myths. And the great thing about this work is that it includes Gilgamesh, but then a whole bunch of other stuff that are not usually translated in their own volumes. So I know there's a number of volumes that, and I even have one here actually, so Penguin puts up this edition, the Epic of Gilgamesh. We don't actually have the entire work of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and not enough to make a coherent narrative. So then we just have this volume here, which includes the Epic of Gilgamesh, but includes two versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh that we have, but it also includes the Atrahasis, which is a creation myth, which is like 40 pages in this volume. Then we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, the standard version, which is like 100 pages. And then we have the Babylonian version, the Old Babylonian version, which is a variation of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Then we have the Descent of Ishtar to the Underworld. Then we have Nergal and Ereshkigal. And then that has two different versions. And then we have Adapta, Etana, Anzu, the Epic of Creation, the Theogony of Dunu, and then Ura and Usham. So this whole table of contents of different creation and mythological stories from the ancient Babylonian period, and it's translated in a very unconventional way. Usually, translators like to fill in the gaps here, but this translator, Stephanie Daly, does not. She goes right to what we actually have and what we don't have. So then you see all these lines here have tons of stuff missing, and just includes it as it is, which I found very refreshing, because then I know I'm getting the Epic of Gilgamesh as much as we have of it, not this version here done by Penguin Classics, which is very much an adaptation of the work, because we don't have enough to fill huge lines like this. You have to do a lot of filling in the gaps as a creative work, and so this version here is done by N.K. Saunders. I've not read this version because I knew that this version was more of like trying to take what we have of the Epic of Gilgamesh and make it into a coherent, unified whole. This just gives you the Epic of Gilgamesh as we have it in its manuscript tradition. So then here you have a lot of words here, but then you have, say, right here in brackets it says a gap of 22 lines. So then from here to here there's a gap, and you don't get that sense with this. And I really appreciated this. This was a really good work of scholarship. She includes introductions for every single piece in here, and you get the full context and history and just what some of the symbols mean. It's very, very good work of ancient myths. So I do recommend that. I have not actually read this version, so I can't say anything about that, but I'll give it a read one of these days. Continuing with old literature, I'm not entirely sure why this work is on this shelf, but it's the Poetic Edda, and it's translated by Caroline Larrington. This is like Scandinavian literature, and includes a lot of the Scandinavian myths in it, but I don't actually know. Norse Icelandic mythology and heroic poetry, and I believe this is like in the Middle Ages. I don't think this is ancient literature at all, but I don't think I have any other place to put this, because it's mythology, it's ancient literature for a culture, so I guess it kind of makes sense having it on the shelf, but so I'll leave it here for now. But I've not read it myself. And then we have the Sayings of Buddha. This is a anthology of, I don't know, different works of that have Buddha speaking and giving wisdom or whatever. This is translated by Rupert Gethin, and I don't know where this is from. The material contained in the Nikayas, the central themes of Buddha's teaching. And I don't think, like, this, I certainly think that this is a selection. We have a lot more of the sayings of Buddha and than just this, but it's interesting to have it nonetheless. And I mean, don't think I'm all that interested in having anything more than this when it comes to the sayings of Buddha. So, and I've not read that volume either. This next volume I have read. This is the First Philosophers, so it's the Pre-Socratics and the Sophists, translated in one volume here. This is by Robin Waterfield. This is the volume to get. If you want to read the Pre-Socratics and the Sophists, this is definitely the volume to get, because Robin Waterfield, his introductions are perfect. If you just read the fragments here, you wouldn't actually get a whole lot from them. At least I didn't, because I didn't understand them. But if you have the context of his individual introductions per character, then you actually get a lot from it, because he likes to synthesize the fragments into what we know and what can we infer from them. And I really like this volume, because it includes, the first 200 pages are the Pre-Socratics, which, when I was looking around, was the most generous selection of fragments from the Pre-Socratics, and then the last 100 pages are from the Sophists, which honestly I originally thought that was not enough. I wanted more than just 100 pages of the Sophists. So let me explain here. So the Pre-Socratics are philosophers pre-Plato, basically, or pre-Plato, because a lot of these were contemporaries of Socrates, from what we know. But they all had these different, but they all wrote stuff, or at least most of them did, but not a lot of it survives. And so the only thing that we have of theirs is usually quotations from later works, or summarizations of their views from, say, Aristotle or Plato, or from later authors. And this volume goes through that, and gives us all these different fragments. All these different paragraphs are different fragments or summaries of views of certain characters. So, for example, we have Thales of Miletus, we have Anaximander, we have Anaximenes, we have Xenophanes, we have Heraclitus, we have Parmenides, and we have Zeno, Pythagoras, and Anaxagoras, and Empedocles. And then it just goes on down the list. And then for Sophists, we have Protagoras, and Gorgias, and Hippias, and Antiphon, and Thrasymachus. And it's just a great anthology of these works. But like I said, I thought I needed more than just 100 pages of the Sophists, so I made the mistake of buying this Penguin Classic volume here. This is the Greek Sophists, which is 400 pages of the Sophists. And honestly, I got maybe halfway through before I gave up, because turns out the Sophists are very boring. Very boring. And I couldn't stand 400 pages of that. So then I went back to this work and just read this volume instead, and I strongly recommend this volume if you want the Greek philosophers, early Greek philosophers from before Plato and Aristotle. Enough of philosophy for a bit. We'll move on to Roman literature again, but in Penguin Classics. This is Virgil's Aeneid. This is one of many translations that I have. I think I have 3 translations. This is the only one on this shelf, because the rest are in different locations, but this is done by David West. David West translation of Virgil's Aeneid. When was this? This volume came out in 1991. So, one of many. I've not read Virgil's Aeneid because I'm not reading Roman literature yet. And then we have another volume of Caesar's Civil War. This I had his Civil War here, and then I also said I had the landmark edition, which is somewhere else. Later on in this shelf tour, we'll be getting to it. This is translated with an introduction by Jane F. Gardner. So, Caesar's Civil War. And then we have a relatively newer volume, at least for me, like a recent purchase. I found this a used copy of Euripides. This is Medea and Other Plays. It includes Alcestis, Medea, the Children of Hercules, and Hippolytus. I've read all 4 of those of of Euripides, but none of them in this translation here done by John Davy. I've not read any of this translation here. I've read Euripides in this other translation. This translation here. This older Penguin Classic. So we have 2 translations of Euripides. This is a modern translation. This is an older one done by Philip Valcott, and this includes Medea, Hercules, Hecabe, and Electra. So I read The Children of Hercules and Hippolytus in a different volume altogether than Penguin Classics. And I gotta say, the Philip Valcott translation I did not find all that compelling. The Medea was very good, and I liked the I think Hecabe. I think I liked that one. I didn't care for the Hercules or the Children of Hercules, and I didn't really care for Euripides' version of Electra. I like Sophocles' version of Electra a lot more. And then we get to more Roman literature. This is Procopius, A Secret History. I've not read this volume either because it's Roman history. But Procopius wrote a ton of history for, who was the emperor? Justinian. For the Emperor Justinian. And he seemed to be a faithful, historian of the emperor until he wrote this volume came out, which is a sleazy gossip fest about the Roman emperor and his wife. And it isn't very long. Just imagine people if they wrote this kind of history nowadays. How interesting things would be. And then we come to one of the biggies of ancient literature. This is St. Augustine's City of God. Massive volume here, all of it. This is Henry Bedinson who does the translation. And I look forward to reading this someday, because I'm fascinated by St. Augustine, and not just as an autobiographic or someone who writes an autobiography, but as someone who is wrestling with theology and with ideas and with his contemporary tragedies and situations. But I won't go much into that because I'm already at 38 minutes for this volume, or for this video. And then we get back to Plato. This is Plato's Symposium. This is done by Christopher Gill. I have not read this translation because I did not own this copy when I was reading Plato. So I can't really say much about it. And then we get to an interesting volume done by Penguin. I don't know if they still keep this volume in print, but I quite liked it. It's Hesiod, but then it also includes Theognis. So it includes Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days, but then it includes Theognis' Elegies, which actually takes up most of the volume, because Hesiod, both of his works combined, don't really take much more than, 86 pages, and then Theognis takes like about 100, or not, okay, that's not true. Theognis takes about like 70 pages, so it's about half-half, I guess, for this volume. But I found that I got a lot more out of Theognis, who I've never heard of before, than I did from Hesiod, though I reread Hesiod in a different translation, in the Oxford version of translation, and I actually got a lot more from it. I actually found it was a lot more interesting, or a lot better translated. So this translation here by Dorothea Wender, I was not impressed by her translation of Hesiod, but when it came to her translation of the elegies here, I thought those are far more interesting. Those are really, it's about like some kind of aristocrat or whatever, of however you would consider someone in power in those times, who loses power and then becomes very cynical in his reflections on life. And it's entertaining, and it's kind of funny, and it's also instructive at the same time. And then we include more Sophocles. This is the 3 Theban plays in the other translation. So I showed off, I don't know if I have it here. Yeah, right here. This version here, this is done by Robert Fagles. This version here is the older Penguin Classic edition done by E.F. Waltling. And I can't say whether or not this is a good translation or not, but if it's anything like some of the older Penguin Classic translations that I've read before of these tragedy plays, then I can't say that this will be any good. But I could be wrong about that, and I hope I am. And then we come to another volume I've read. This is the Penguin version of Aristotle's Poetics. A very slim volume, because we don't have it in its entirety, or it was never finished. Because it is like 50 pages, and for something that is 50 pages long, it really does cast a shadow, probably more so than any of Aristotle's other works, except for maybe the Ethics, but this is like really, or maybe actually his works of logic. I don't know, Aristotle wrote a ton of stuff that really does cast a shadow, but at least in the area of literature, this really does cast a shadow. And maybe not deservedly so. It's more people's interpretations, because Aristotle isn't entirely clear with a lot of his stuff here. He promises that he'll go into deeper explanations about certain concepts later on in his work, and we don't get those explanations. So then we have to go off of the dashed off summaries that he gives off in here, but then also his reflections on the perfect tragedy and the perfect, or the analyzing like the mode of epic poetry versus tragedy versus other forms of poetry. So it's a fine read. It's a quick read, and maybe this is the way to go to read Aristotle for the first time. But for me, this was the last work of Aristotle that I read. And then we have another translation of Plato's Republic, in a translation that I have not read. This is Richard W. Sterling and William C. Scott, in a Norton translation of this work. I think this is an older translation too. Yeah, 1985. I mean, it's old for me because I wasn't born then, but for most of you, I'm sure this was, probably yesterday. But just insulting my viewers. Insulting the 3 viewers that get this far in this video, and all the Russian sex bots that boost my view count. Anyways, I have 2 more works, so we're almost there. So at 43 minutes, I have Ovid's Metamorphoses in this big volume here. This is translated by Rolf Humphreys, and then it's got annotated notes by Joseph D. Reed. So this is an old translation from like the 50s or something, and Joseph D. Reed just annotates the hell out of this thing. Let's see if I can show you again. Yeah, here he provides commentary, which doesn't actually seem like a lot, but this thing is really big, like it's oversized, so he adds a lot of stuff in the back. I thought it would be more than that, honestly, but oh well. It is what it is, and it's one of, 3 or 4 versions of Ovid that I have, and we've already seen 2 of them. Yeah, I have an Oxford, I have this version here, so that's 2, I have a Penguin, that's 3, and then I have the Signet Classic, which is the Horace Gregory translation, which is on top, with my mass market classics. And then last but not least, the grand finale of this ancient classics shelf, in part 2, is Plotinus, the Aeneids, this enormous work of theology, non-Christian theology, of Neoplatonist theology, about how the world works and how the world exists, and the role of the mind, and all kinds of other mind-bending stuff, because I don't think this is an easy work, because obviously it took all these translators to even get it done. It took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 translators. And I'll just zoom close here so you can read them yourself, because I'm not reading all those names. But yeah, it's done by Cambridge University Press, and it's just this big fat work of ancient philosophy, one of the last works of philosophical theology, pre-Christian philosophical theology. So, yeah, that's it. That's it for the shelf. I hoped you enjoyed this, and I hope my face was not blending with that light too much to make me look freaky. But that's it for now, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, BookTube.